Hi, I'm Claire Williamson, an ex-litigator and the co-founder of Leading Minds. With 97% of lawyers complaining that stress is impacting their health, I think it's time that we figure out how challenging the pressures of the legal industry can be. So this podcast is a space where lawyers can discuss how they've overcome the challenges they face in their role and gone on to thrive within their career. So whether you're a trainee, a partner, or anyone in between, I really hope that this podcast will leave you feeling inspired, empowered, and with the confidence that you can leave your mark on the legal industry. And today I'm really honoured to be joined by Caitlin McFee, an NQ at Linklaters. So as many and new trainees are entering the industry today, Caitlin will be sharing with us the difference between her expectations of what being a trainee would be like versus reality. So thank you so much for joining me today, Caitlin.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
So it'd be really interesting to hear firstly your kind of journey into the legal industry.
Yeah, of course. So I actually studied French at university as my undergrad and kind of had thought maybe I'd want to be a lawyer, but wasn't really committed to it at that point in time. And then when I graduated, I did the Marks and Spencer's graduate scheme initially before realizing that actually law was something that I wanted to pursue. So I then did the typical conversion route, got a training contract with Linklaters, went and did the graduate diploma in law, followed by the LPC, and then started at Links 2 years ago and have just finished my training contract there.
Amazing. Did it feel a bit weird me calling you an NQ, seeing as you've...
Yeah, it really did. I was like, oh, I'm not an NQ yet, but actually I will be by the time that this podcast goes live.
Yeah, I know, you'll be an NQ tomorrow and then it's released the day after, so there you go. Your first introduction as an NQ. So I was just going to say, I mean, I would really love to know, when you joined at Linklaters, what your expectations were of what that would be like versus maybe what the reality was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I had quite bad expectations of what the training contract was going to be like. And I think that was based on, the experiences of some of my friends, and particularly, a lot of my friends who were in banking, who were working really quite horrific hours. So I went into it thinking that I would have absolutely no sleep. It was going to be really quite dreadful. And I was really, really nervous about how I was going to cope with that. I think that, there definitely were challenges through the whole training contract for me, but broadly it was a much better experience than I had been expecting. And I think that was probably in large part due to just, having quite open communication with the people in the environment, and just managing my own and other people's expectations of me.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, that's something, having trained and qualified at Slaughter May, I remember before I joined, the kind of expectations I was placing on myself and the kind of hype around about how horrific, like, let's be honest, that's what I kind of expected it would be like. And, at the moment I'm launching loads of trainee programs and talking to them about like what challenges are you anticipating, are coming your way, and some of the things they're saying, I just want to be like, no, there might be periods where it's like that. There of course there's going to be times when it's long working hours or really tight deadlines, but not every single day. And for me, I think that was probably the exception rather than the rule.
I think that's right. I definitely would agree with that. I think it really depends on what department you're in. And, some departments, like transactional departments, tend to be like a little bit like a roller coaster. So you'll have a real peak of busyness, and there'll probably be a few weeks where you're really busy, but then it will dip and you will have a few days where, unheard of, but you might get out at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Which, you go into a training contract thinking I'm never going to have an evening, and you've signed up for that. You're expecting that, and you're ready to do 2 years of having no life, basically. And then you realize that actually you can still have a life as a trainee, and it's not nearly as bad as you thought. And those lulls enable you to go through the heavier periods. I don't think that I ever had, weeks like I expected I would have. And I think I only ever stayed in the office past midnight twice in the last 2 years. So it really was the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, I think as well that I didn't have too many times past midnight. I think it was a little bit more than two, unfortunately. But
Mm.
it wasn't. One of the things that I found that when I was having long hours actually was because I worked with someone who worked really well in the evenings, and that was really difficult because I am such like a morning person. Like I get up, I do my work, and
Yeah.
then afternoons I'll like maybe do a bit of admin, and then I'll kind of like perk up again about 4 for a couple of hours, and then after like 7 I'm done, like I'm totally
Yeah.
done. But she kind of like perked up from about 4 in the afternoon until midnight. So I was kind of a little bit, unfortunately, as the junior member of the team, the person that kind of was supporting her, and that was quite difficult. But other than that,
Yeah.
it wasn't really necessarily just due to sheer volume of work as such.
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on a really interesting point there about how different people have different working styles. And particularly now when everyone's working remotely, it's really difficult to adapt to that. And I think as a trainee, when you're working with a principal, you can really think that, you know, you have to work how they work. And I definitely fell prey to that. You know, if my principal was online, I felt like I had to be. But what I hadn't perhaps realized was that, you know, my principal might not have logged on as early as I did, or might have gone out for a lunch or whatever that may be, and didn't expect me to do the same hours as they were doing. I think one thing that all trainees need to know, and I had to learn the hard way, was that, you know, the people you're working with will send you emails as and when they think of them, because if they don't send it, then they'll forget about it. That does not mean that you need to pick up that email at the time that it was sent and action it. Now, if the person sending the email was busy, or perhaps didn't think about how it might land, they may not have expressly said in that email, you know, this is not something I need you to do now, and can you please do it by X deadline? And what I did especially as a first seat trainee was, I received an email. You know, if it was at 11 p.m, I'd see the email, I'd get out of bed, I'd log onto my laptop, and I would think, I need to do this now.
Yeah.
And it was only when my principal then responded and said, I'm so sorry, this was not something I needed you to do tonight, that conversation started to happen.
Yeah.
I think you have to learn to push back sometimes on those and
Yeah.
ask, what is the deadline for this? Do I need to do it now or not?
Yeah, and I think there's so many different kind of, you know, when we kind of launched trainee programs, when I launched trainee programs, sorry, I have like this slide, and it's like working with your supervisor and colleagues, and that covers into one of the points that it's like managing people's expectations, but also asking for timelines. And I think at the moment that because people feel like they want to show they're capable, they're keen, they're willing, like of course they do, right? But what they kind of don't take into the equation is that they're not then kind of, you know, they're not really showing themselves at their best actually, because they end up being quite unproductive, quite inefficient. So actually being able to actually manage people's expectations and communicate effectively is far more impressive than showing that you got out of your bed and responded at midnight. Like, if anything, that's kind of a little bit worrying, like you said, like that your supervisor was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another really important thing, is that, you know, ultimately, yes, it's a 2-year training contract, but it's also your life, and it's your responsibility to decide, you know, how you're going to balance these things. And I think that one thing that I found was, people actually have respected every time that I've set my boundaries and said, you know, actually, that this time I can't do this in this time, but I could do it between these hours. Would that be okay? Because I think it's really key for people to learn that everybody does have a life outside of work. And I have found that when I've set my boundaries, people are very respectful of them and very receptive to that. You know, just because you're a trainee doesn't mean that you can't be busy for 2 hours in an evening. Yeah, there are times when work is critical, and you cannot take those 2 hours, and you accept that that's what you've signed up for. But most of the time, you know, there's always going to be someone that can pick up for you in that 2 hours, and then you do the same in return.
Yeah,
It's a quid pro
definitely.
quo.
People are always shocked that I used to go to the gym at lunchtime whilst I was a trainee, as in every single day, apart from maybe a couple of occasions when really genuinely I could not get out. But for me, that was really important, and that was something that was a priority, because if I did that, I knew I was really efficient in the afternoon. If I
Yeah.
didn't do that, I knew come 3 p.m. I was really awful. And I think at the moment, you know, whenever I tell trainees that, they're like, what? Because they've almost kind of signed up for this like 2-year job interview
Yes.
where, you know, they kind of feel like I've just got to throw everything I have at it. And I do understand that. And I know, because I've been there and you've been there, that there are times that it does have to be like that. But if you kind of are setting yourself up in that way, I think you're almost setting yourself up for burnout in some kind of scenarios, you know, that it will get to a point it feels unsustainable. And unfortunately, when you qualify, it isn't like it's a reset button, you start again. You just kind of have like different responsibilities and
Yeah.
more responsibilities. Sorry, am I terrifying you now? You know,
No.
it's like there's that extra responsibility. So it isn't necessarily that you throw everything in until you've got that job and then it's like, okay, and then I continue to work this way. You know, I think you need to find that balance from an early stage if you want to set yourself up for long-term sustainable success in the legal industry.
I couldn't agree more. And I learned that the hard way, you know, like in my first seat, I definitely fell prey to feeling like I had to be there all of the time. I had to be the person that left after my principal, who happens to be somebody that likes working late in the office. I wasn't allowed to go to the gym. I wasn't allowed to see my friends outside of work. I felt like I had to ask permission for everything I wanted to do, but was too scared to ask permission in case it looked bad. And I did burn out. You know, I was on 2 really busy transactions that got, you know, both busy at the same time. And ultimately ended up one day having an anxiety attack in the office and getting signed off work for 3 weeks. And I think it was that experience that really made me take a hard look at myself and what I was doing and realize that, you know, nobody is going to live your life for you. And unless you set your boundaries and you ask for what you want, you're not going to get it. And also, if you make yourself completely indispensable, ultimately, like, people will begin to have that expectation of you. If you pick up your email at 3 a.m, well, who do you think they're going to email when they need something done at 3 a.m? You know, and that's not to say that you should not pick anything up because you don't want to be that person. But, you know, for me, it has all come down to communication. And it was a piece of feedback I was given in my first seat, which was, you know, instead of being afraid to ask, just let us know where you are, let us know what you're doing. If it's okay, we'll say it's okay. If it's not, we'll tell you. It's all about the open dialogue. And I'm so grateful now that I had that experience, because the rest of my training contract has been like a comparative breeze compared to the first seat. And I've had brilliant working relationships. You know, I one-upped you on the gym thing, and I used to go to the gym at like 3:30 in the afternoon.
But you do win that one.
It was quieter in the gym.
Yeah, I wasn't ballsy enough to do that, so I'll give you definitely won that one. I was like, I could get it as a lunch hour.
Yeah. I mean, I would prefer to eat my lunch at my desk, crack on with my work, and then go to the gym when I knew that the machines I wanted would be free. I could do it faster. Everyone knew where I was. I was on my mobile if anyone needed to reach me, and it was a 5-minute walk from the office if anything kicked off. And not once did I have to come back early from my gym session. Because you pretty much know if you're going to have an hour free or not.
That's the thing as well that I think people kind of get themselves stressed out with. But like, what if someone needs me? I just always give this to new trainees as well, that like, not once in the whole time I was a trainee did the head partner of of Slosham May phone me and say, Claire, it is going down. Do you know what I mean? It was like, of course we want to be like the great support network, and we want to show that we're like keen, but also we are trainees. We're there to learn, we're there to grow, develop, and then be that person that's kind of indispensable. But in the early stages, you know, it's a lot more bundling and document reviews. It's kind of heading up that kind of corporate transaction or takeover.
So true. I think, you know, not to make any trainees feel like your work is not important, because
sorry to add that in.
Like, your work is actually really integral. But I think, you know, this is another thing I learned when I had that period of being signed off. Honestly, this transaction I was on was so unbelievably busy. We'd all been working really late, round the clock, and I just felt I cannot possibly go off sick now and let the team down. So I actually had gone to my doctor's appointment that morning, and they'd said, you're not fit to work, you need to go home right now. And I said, well, I can't possibly. So I went to the office and had the panic attack in the office. And when I told my principal what was going on, she was like, Caitlin, no offense, but we don't need you. Like, put your laptop down, turn off your phone and go home. Like, we
Yeah.
will be okay. And you have to realize this is why you have big teams and lots of people, and there's always someone that can step in. And ultimately, if you're not coping well, you're not going to do the job well.
Yeah.
So
And that's when
let
actually it
them
makes
step
much
in.
more of a worse impression, I think, if you're making
100%.
mistakes. The same with not feeling able to ask for like clean instructions and stuff like this. If
Yeah.
you feel like you can't go back and ask for more information because
Mhm.
you don't know what to do, what's going to look worse, spending like 12 hours doing this task or this project and come back with something that's not what they asked for, or going
Yeah.
back and just saying, I just got a couple of quick questions, can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
And what do you think is going to look better? And I wish again in retrospect, all of this is so obvious, isn't it? But
Yeah.
were you really worried as well about people's perception of you after being signed off for 3 weeks? That must have been really
Hugely.
difficult.
Hugely, especially because it was in my first seat, and
Mm.
also because it was right at the end, and I actually had a 2-week holiday booked at the end of my seat. So I got signed off for 3 weeks, came back for 1.5 maybe on reduced hours, and then was going off on a 2-week holiday. And I actually felt like I couldn't take my holiday because I just had this time off. And it was actually my principal that just said, a holiday is a holiday. It's different. You're entitled to your annual leave. Please go. It's going to make you feel better.
Yeah.
But I definitely struggled. And joining my next seat, with the HR team, we had a few conversations with the trainee partner to make sure that, I was eased back into it, the hours, the workload, etc. And I did really have this feeling of just like, oh, like I'm the one that's not coping, that I'm the one that's got the special circumstances. And I was worried about the impact it would have just on my overall grades and performance reviews, because I really didn't want anybody to think that I couldn't pull my weight and I wasn't good enough.
Mm.
But that definitely wasn't the reality. The process of slotting back in was pretty seamless. I did have reduced hours for a while just to protect myself.
Yeah.
But ultimately, no, I think one thing that you realize when you go through that is it's so much more common than you think, and there are so many more people on reduced hours, or different contracts, or who've got various things going on. And ultimately, I think one thing that I would really like to see in law firms now is just creating a much more open and accepting environment for people to say what's going on in their lives. Because the thing that got me through the rest of my training contract was being able to go into work and say, I'm actually having a really hard day today, or something's going on at home and I'm not my full self, so please forgive me if I have to step out and take a call, or I may need to head off earlier today, and so I just want to give you a heads up. And it just made everything so much easier.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I had also a slightly alternative traineeship, having as I joined at the firm, finding out that my dad actually had motor neuron disease, and he lived in Aberdeen, I lived in London. I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible, and was traveling upwards and up and down. I was understandably very upset. I was having a really difficult time, with home life. And then my dad passed away, and I actually had to step away from my training contract, defer my training contract for a few months, and then go back in a different intake. And as you said, like, being able to have those conversations and say, actually, something is going on. And it doesn't have to be something extreme as having had an anxiety attack, having lost a parent. It might be that, like, you've got things going on with your relationship, or it might be that you just, you're just feeling like you're having really depressive thoughts, or whatever it is. Just being able to kind of acknowledge it, I think, is really important. And I think many people probably feel like they can't, but there are resources, whether it's HR, whether it's like EAP helplines, whether it's talking to mental health first aiders, whether it's even talking to your peers. I think it's really important, that this discussion is being had much more openly.
No, I totally agree. And I also think, I think firms are now better at making especially trainees aware of the support on offer. And I have seen, even since I went off sick compared to now, the comms that I see coming through the firm are just, they're so much more frequent and so much fuller in terms of here's what's available to you. And I would say that that was true even before, you know, lockdown and COVID happened. We've certainly had an awful lot more coming around since then. But I do think that I have witnessed, even in the last 2 years, a lot of really positive step changes for opening up and talking about these things. I've seen firms setting up, you know, mental health committees or groups. There's a lot of work going on in the junior lawyers division, with the Law Society, you've got law care. You know, I've been working with Thriving from the start, as, you know, working with young people, mental health in the city. So I think there is a lot more going on, but ultimately there are still pockets anywhere that you go in any working environment where it's not acceptable to talk about these things. And some people are always going to find it an uncomfortable conversation, but that's where it comes back to looking at, you know, what are the central resources that are available, and use them. Because you may be scared and you may think there'll be a negative perception, but ultimately they exist for a reason. And if you don't use them, you're only going to set yourself up for a fall.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is that there's always going to be certain people that get to a certain point in their career and say, actually, this isn't for me, for whatever reason, whether it's because they want to go in-house, whether they want to go to a different law firm, whatever it is. But I think, like, being able to have the discussions, you then start to get more a feel of, is this actually much more normal than I'm actually giving credit, you know, because there's a lot of like comparison amongst your peers, isn't there? So you're looking at everyone else thinking, well, they're doing fine, why am I struggling so much? Having, you know, I had like anxiety attacks, panic attacks when I was you know, a trainee and onwards as well. I love a panic attack. They don't stop when I left. But I had things like that and I didn't speak about them. And then when I did speak about them to someone, I realized like it wasn't just me and that they'd experienced that as well. Whereas on surface value, when I was looking at everyone, they were doing great. So I think I was really scared to talk out in the same way that you probably were, thinking that people would judge me or whatever else. But I kind of learned that it actually was more normal than I anticipated. And actually, if it maybe hadn't been as accepted, that might have been a little sign for me that I maybe would be better off in a slightly smaller law firm, or maybe, you know, having a slightly alternative career. And I'm not kind of encouraging anyone to move or to leave or anything like that, but I do think you have to be able to be comfortable in your working environment and be yourself, or else what are you, you know, what are you doing? That is a long day to be pretending. And obviously we need to be professional, obviously we have to keep that into consideration, but you know, it's like finding that balance that works for you.
Absolutely. And that kind of makes me think about, I remember when I was applying to Linklaters and I was given some advice by one of the partners who said, if I can give you one piece of advice for your interview, is go in and be yourself. Because ultimately we're looking to see whether you're the kind of person that we would want to be sat in an office with. You know, yes, like everyone that comes through these doors is clever, is, you know, they've done well in their exams and they understand the law. Like that's a given. You don't get here to this point if you don't. But now we're looking at, are you the kind of person that we want to work with? You know, is this going to be a positive working relationship? And that means being you, bringing your whole self into work. And, you know, I think a lot of us have real difficulty doing that and showing up in exactly, you know, the way that we are. But talk about your hobbies, talk about what goes on in your life, wear your nose ring to work, you know, like that's one thing. People are always so surprised that I've worn a nose ring at Linklaters. And it was a partner that told me to do it, you know, because he was like, well, but I don't understand why you wouldn't wear it. What do you mean? We don't care. And I think that was a big moment for me when I realized that they want me to be me. That's why they employed me. And so stop trying to pretend to be someone that you're not. Ultimately, all that does is come across as really inauthentic. And that makes for a tense working environment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I've definitely seen this, that like, for example, When I've been working from home for 5 years, like maybe more than that, maybe 6 years. And whenever I did webinars, I sat at this really like uncomfortable, jaunty angle in my office so that there was nothing behind me, because I thought that was really professional because there was only a blank white wall. However, I don't want to sit in a blank white office all day because I find that a little bit miserable and soul destroying. So
Yeah.
I have things I like a flamingo picture, or, you know, whatever else, some cactuses, whatever else is behind me. I can't really see without looking. I I always sat at that angle, and then since lockdown, like having seen like people with their like bookcases behind them, or partners with, I remember interviewing a partner for a podcast, and it had like, he had eat sleep repeat, like cycle sleep repeat underneath, like on a little banner like behind him, and I was like, I would never have known that about him, that he was still
Yeah.
keen on cycling. And it kind of made me realize, like, we're seeing so much more into people's lives, we're seeing so much more personality. And now I sit very comfortably whilst I'm doing my webinars, and it's so much nicer. Like, I feel like I actually am better at my job now because I'm not trying to be like what I expect people. Of course, I'm always trying to be professional, like, you know, that's kind of still an aim, but I can
Yeah.
still be like my version of professional. And
Yeah.
I think that, you know, when you are, you know, working from home, I know that many people at the moment are probably experiencing lots of challenges, that especially as junior members of the team. When I was a trainee, I did not have an office space. I didn't have, you know, I would have been like perched on the end of my bed. But I think trying to like make this work and realize that people, like, things have changed. Like, would you agree with that?
100%. I think they were already changing, as I said, before coronavirus and lockdown. But lockdown has definitely just like accelerated that change exponentially.
Mm.
And I would agree with you, you know, when I'm having a Zoom or whatever, a WebEx video call with a partner at the firm, and they've got their kids running in, and I've got some ridiculous thing going on in the background. My brother's popped in to say hello, and my WhatsApp's pinging like it has been through this interview. Like, I think that it just really offers you an insight into just like who we are as people behind the mask that we often put on at work. And I've just found I feel much more at ease now working with people. I feel much more at ease working with new people. I mean, what's been interesting for me in the last 6 months is that I've been working remotely, but virtually, for the Paris office, because I was meant to be on secondment in Paris. And so I've been working with a team of people that I have literally never met in person, speaking a different language. It's all been done via video calls and, you know, emails and virtual instant messaging. And I have developed much better relationships with the team than I ever thought I would have been able to.
That's really interesting. And I
Which
think
is
that's so relevant.
stunning.
Yeah, for people that are joining at the moment, you know, we're launching so many programs, and I must say, like, I do feel for people thinking, you're working with a team and you've never even met them. That must be
Yeah.
so difficult. So you can kind of vouch that you've had 6 months of doing it. It is possible. It's possible to make a good impression and get the exposure. Did you feel that you didn't get the same exposure that you would have had you been in the office?
I think it's really hard to say because I'd never done this area of law before. And also I think coronavirus has just really changed the amount of work that the team has had. And it's been different type of work as well, you know, because it was a banking seat, and it's all been kind of French government backed loans work, which didn't exist pre-coronavirus. That said, you know, I think firms are going to have to work out what works best in terms of people knowing what work is available and what people's capacity is. I think it's still a learning process. I definitely had more than enough exposure to the type of work that I wanted to do to get out of the seat. I think as a junior, what's really challenging is you're not aware of what there is going on. And so I mean, if you don't know the people and you've not met them before, you don't even know who to ask.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I often found myself sat with absolutely nothing on my plate for that day, thinking, oh God, what do I do? Like, who do I contact? And you don't want to be the annoying person that's
Yeah, I
ringing
know.
every day going, hi, I've got capacity. Does anybody have any work for me?
Mm.
So I think that is something that all teams need to think about, especially if they're going to have juniors working remotely, is how do you let your juniors know what there is available to do? And I would suggest actually giving kind of, you know, sending a round robin of here's what's available, and then let people volunteer themselves for A, the work they want to do, and B, the amount of time that they have.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to entrust people with running their own schedules, you need to give them the opportunity to step up to the plate.
Yeah, and I think that one thing I remember as a trainee as well always concerned me was putting myself at, like, say I had, like, I knew I had 2 days that I didn't have much going on, but there was something simmering in the background and I didn't know what it was going to kind of come off.
Mm.
It was kind of like, do I say to people, guys, like, I've got capacity, or do I not? Because then I might end up like absolutely swamped, and it's
Yeah.
so difficult. So like you said, like having kind of working relationships with a couple of people, and maybe even like finding out within your team who's the junior members within your team, and
Mm.
trying to develop a relationship with them, whether it's even just saying like, I'm just new to the team and I'd love to have, half an hour to have like a virtual coffee or something like that. I hate that term, virtual coffee, but never mind. And something like that, because I think when I was actually in the working environment, the junior members of the team were the ones that, like, the kind of the NQs, the people maybe 1 or 2 years qualified, they'd be the people I could kind of go to quite honestly, feeling like they remembered what it was like to be like, I have capacity today, but I probably am going to be busy in a couple of days. Have you got anything in a different way, from not feeling I could say that to a partner? So
Yeah.
I don't really know the answer. And I think every firm, every seat, every department is going to be different. But doing things like that, reaching out to people and trying to build those relationships is so fundamentally important. Don't just rely on your principal, your supervisor,
Yeah.
whoever, your mentor. Like, trying to build those other relationships as well, I think is really important.
100%. And I think another thing that I learned, which I initially found very difficult, was I never felt like, if somebody gave me a piece of work, in my mind, that was my piece of work that I had to do alone. And, I couldn't ask anybody for help. And as I've gone through my training contract, I've realized that, yes, someone will ask me to do something. All that means is that they want me to own that piece of work. That means that I can use all of the resources that are available to me in the firm to get that piece of work done, like, the most efficiently and to the best standard. If that means reaching out and asking a secretary to help you do some formatting, or do like some input, some admin input, or reaching out to one of your fellow colleagues to say, hey, like, you said you were free, do you have a bit of capacity to help me with this, because I actually could also use the time to do something else.
Yeah.
What it means is you're the person that needs to review that piece of work before you send it out, and it's on your shoulders if it's not done properly. But that's kind of also how you grow, because as you get more senior through the firm, your role does become more of a supervisory role. And so the more practice you can get doing that as a trainee, the better.
Yeah.
I think it's good to learn that it's perfectly acceptable to do that quite early on. And that took me a long time to learn.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was very lucky that I had we were very much told, like, from quite an early point of view, if there's something your secretary should be doing, you should be passing it to them. And when I kind of got into that, because initially I'd be like, oh no, I'll just try and do it myself, I'll input these comments or do it, and it was like, no, that's not my job. And then it's by asking them more regularly, you build that confidence, and also you develop a relationship with your secretary, which is so if there's one tip, it's build a good relationship with your secretary, because they are
Could not agree more.
who will be saving you, time and time again. Or even like when I was in the office, it would kind of be like, I sat with 4 partners, which was interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd be saying to my secretary, has he just gone out to grab a sandwich, or has he gone to a meeting? Like, am I able to go to the gym, or should I be, like all of these things. I think your secretaries are so fundamental to help you kind of grow and develop. I would say as well, if I was to say one thing to people joining at the moment, actually kind of put down like a list of questions that you want to know. Like, if your supervisor starts work at 7:30 in the morning, do they expect you to start work at 7:30 in the morning? Do you are they happy for you to take an hour at lunchtime to go to the gym? If you go and play rugby on a Thursday afternoon or evening, sorry, are they happy for that to be part of your schedule, even though sometimes it might have to come away because of work? Like, make a list of the things that matter to you and you want to know, and actually just schedule time for a conversation with your supervisor, because I think we, put a lot of expectations on ourselves, and we kind of read into what we think people are thinking, or their perception of us. And often it's just not the case. And I think as a junior member, you often feel like you just have to take whatever your supervisor, throws at you, or, you need to be the one that's like, yes, okay, and you can't push back in any way. But I think actually it's a two-way street. It's a working relationship. And although you are more junior, although it's always going to be this hierarchy, being able to kind of play an active role in that relationship is so fundamentally important. Did you ever kind of have that conversation with your supervisor, or do you kind of wish that you had?
Yeah, so after my first seat, where I hadn't had it in the beginning, and obviously could have had, but just had the perception in my mind that it wasn't an acceptable thing to do.
Yeah.
I have had that conversation subsequently with everyone that I've worked with. And I think the way that I try and see it is, when I'm having that kind of conversation, I'm just talking to a colleague. I'm talking to another human being. It's not, I don't see that person then as like my boss or my principal or supervisor or whatever it may be. When they're acting in that capacity, then of course it's a slightly different conversation in an appraisal, when they're giving me work, you know. But when we're talking about our lives outside of work and how we like to work, that's just a working relationship. And so I think for me, that's been something that's helpful, is to remind myself that yes, I'm a trainee, but you don't always have to look at the kind of hierarchy of the structure of your firm when you're interacting with people. And the moment that I got rid of that was the moment that I started having better working relationships with everyone, you know, partners, managing associates, counsel, secretaries. It doesn't matter what the level of the person is. Ultimately, we're all just human beings going to work.
Yeah.
And the more that you can
work.
do that, or not going to work, is the case. Yeah, so I think I would really encourage all trainees to see whoever they work with as just a colleague when they're talking about, you know, who they are as people and what they like to do and how they like to work. And I think we're moving towards a culture now, hopefully, where people are accepting of the fact that we have different working styles and preferences. Some people are morning people, some people are evening people. You know, some people like to get their head down and not talk to anyone. Some people like to ask a lot of questions. If you don't know how the other person works, you're going to clash heads. You just will at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And the final thing I'd add to that as well is, I think the clues in the job title, trainee, like in training, learning, don't be scared to ask questions, because you will not, you know, that's how you learn and develop and grow. And having conversations in this way, or going back and asking for further instructions, it shows that you're proactive. It shows that you're actually kind of making a conscious effort to develop and to grow. So why would that ever be a bad thing, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think really, really important. And I think so many people have probably found this just so useful, especially as, you know, they're joining, they're finding, you know, maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed, feeling a bit swamped. So thank you so much for your insight into, you know, all of that kind of area.
Very welcome.
Before I finish, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions that we always finish the podcast with. So the first one I'd love to know is, what does resilience mean to you?
Good question. I think resilience, put me on the spot there, Claire. To me, resilience means being able to balance your needs against the requirements of your job in a sustainable way. I think it's really important that you know that in order to do your job properly, you need to put yourself and your health and well-being needs first. And if you do that, you will be able to continue delivering to the best of your possible ability. If you don't do that, you will burn out.
Yeah, very good. Very succinct, very to the point. Might just steal that for our website. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, what would your number one tip for sustainable success within the legal industry be? Imagine it ties in closely to what you just said.
I think, yeah, it's a very similar answer. Sustainable success, I think it would be, look, see it as a marathon and not a sprint. You know, especially as a trainee, you've got 2 years ahead of you, but that's just the beginning. And the better you set yourself up at the very start, the easier and the more rewarding your career is going to be long term. So I think for me, it was coming back to, what are my values and how am I going to live by those, both in life and in work?
Yeah.
And as long as you do that, you will set yourself up for success that you can sustain for the duration of your career and your life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm very, very down with this angle. The final thing I'd love to know is, who inspires you within the legal industry and think would be a fantastic guest on the podcast?
Ooh, that's a great question. Does it have to be a specific person? Do you know, I think one person I have always said really, really inspires me was my first principal at Linklaters, Serena Williams. She is an extremely driven and highly successful individual, but also somebody who speaks out very actively about women in law, and I think is really pushing the agenda to make sure that we have equality of opportunity within the legal industry for women. And I think I look up to her particularly because I had that experience in my first seat and had all these preconceptions about what it would be like. And she is the person who enabled me to start looking at things a bit differently and put myself first. And yeah, I think, you know, there are a lot of really fantastic insights that I think she would be able to share about her journey and what it's like to be a woman chasing partnership in the legal industry.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Luke, thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, I just think everyone who's kind of on this is going to feel so much more reassured to have that open, insightful, honest kind of perception of what it actually is like. And as we both said, you know, yes, it's going to be busy. There's going to be times when it's very demanding, but also there's so much more within your control than I think you initially envisage as a trainee. And that's really important to kind of keep at the forefront of your mind and find the way to, you know, shape your career in a way that sits well with you and sits comfortably.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And ultimately just enjoy it.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
the more that you battle against it, the harder it's going to be. So just enjoy the process.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for joining me. I just wanted to say to everyone that is listening to today's podcast, please do follow us on LinkedIn at Leading Minds, and you will be kept up to date with weekly episodes of the podcast, and also subscribe on our website, leadingmindsglobal.com/podcast to be sent, you know, the weekly episodes direct to your inbox. So thank you so much, Caitlin, for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking to everyone on the podcast again soon.
Thanks very much, Claire.